Due to a malicious exploit that occurred during the peak of Dark Souls' release that involved entering into someone's world and forcing their soul level to SL1, one of the last ever patches for Dark Souls involved a new feature where one could sit down at a bonfire and level up completely for free until their original soul level. This exploit is partially why SL1 runs became popular, because people were being forced to play the game with no levels at all. Within the debug of Dark Souls exists a feature called Human Up, or Restore Humanity, where one can trade their current stats for 4 liquid humanity per stat sacrificed. However, it won't allow you to go any lower than the class you started with, so unfortunately you wouldn't be able to trade all of your resistance stat for humanities in return. The downside of this humanity trading is that your soul level would stay the same, making you effectively weaker than the game originally intended. In the hands of a gamer who didn't pay much attention to the game, this would probably drive them to a state of madness. The only reason you can give the female character model pigtails is because there was a female graphics artist on the development team who fell ill and had to leave. She asked, before leaving, for pigtails to be added. Although the pigtails do feel a little out of place, it's actually sweet to know that they only exist due to a granted wish for a friend. The actual intended use of the dung pie item was for the player to use it on themselves once they discovered the blowpipe snipers, so they could induce a much milder toxic on themselves and make their way back up or down Blighttown with a slightly higher chance of survival, as the toxic effect cannot stack. The damage numbers of the dung pie and the toxic blowpipes are intentionally different despite both inflicting the same status effect. This also may be why the blooming purple musk lump is an annoyance to acquire, as it is meant to be a last resort, similar to the divine blessing. Guinevere is as big as she is because she is a direct reference to a 1974 one-shot manga called Yasuragi no Yukata, in which a man joins a members-only club where giant women baby, nurture, and care for men like a mother would. Miyazaki liked the idea of this, and as such, Guinevere was born. Guinevere also originally had mouths in the palm of her hands that were fully animated, and this is why the version of Guinevere in the final game doesn't move her mouth at all. It was intended that Guinevere would move her hands forward when speaking to the player, in which obviously the mouths on the palm of her hand would move, and then she would retract them back into her lap when she was done speaking.
Undead sacrifices, you'll seek a friend, the primordial serpent.
This one is fairly well known, but every time you kill a boss in Dark Souls as a white phantom, the faith requirement to join the Warriors of Sunlight Covenant decreases by 5, allowing you to join the Covenant with 0 faith if one kills enough bosses as a phantom. Password-based summoning also counts towards this, allowing you to bypass the default summoning restrictions. In the depths, there are boxes that rats jump out of to ambush you, but due to a coding error when porting Prepare to Die edition to Remastered, if you break those same boxes with a projectile before triggering the ambush, the rats in question will simply cease to exist until you reset the area at a bonfire. Despite Dark Souls' endings being player choice and overall not morally judged, there are 2 movie files named Ending Bad and Ending Good, respectively. I couldn't get Ending Bad to load, as all it did was force my screen to black, but Ending Good simply starts up the credits and rolls them all the way through, implying there really is no such thing as a bad ending within this franchise. Painted World of Ariamus was based on a prototype of Dark Souls to ensure the development team was on the same page when it came to game direction, and this is why the level is so small and literally disconnected from anything else in the game. On top of this, talking of the Painted World, when it comes to Priscilla, her original role was that of a somewhat firekeeper without the official title, simply being just Priscilla. She was intended to be a nod to the Maiden in Black from Demon Souls. Priscilla has unused animations of her standing and sitting, which would have taken place every time the player reloaded into Firelink. There is a text overlay within the game's files that is titled Congratulations, which just presents a slurry of the other text overlays pasted on top of each other, which I find pretty funny. Congratulations! Being Gravelorded in Dark Souls means that another player has cursed your world with an Eye of Death that infects it with red phantom-like enemies that will spawn in your PvE world that have amplified stats and are often harder to deal with. Within the debug, you can actually force this feature completely offline by setting your world tendency to full black. Yes, the Demon Souls kind. On the other hand, I set the tendency to full white and nothing appeared to change. And by default, your world tendency is set to grey, and it doesn't appear to change on its own throughout the playthrough, unless your world is, well, Gravelorded. On the topic of Demon Souls, there is a true death toggle within the debug of Dark Souls. I tried to get it to work by altering the values, but alas, nothing seemed to have happened. Although I do have to wonder why it even exists in the Dark Souls debug, considering it was cut in the early days of Demon Souls. Perhaps Miyazaki considered it at one point? Although I think it might have been a little bit intense for its time. The crossbow Avalyn, or Avalyn depending on how you read it, belongs to Domnor of Xena. However, it was moved to the Duke's archives, unfortunately, in Miyazaki's own words. And this is probably why it's quite an extravagant weapon compared to everything else in the game, and especially compared to everything else in the Duke's archives. Gravelord Nito has his own tail cut mechanic that was scrapped in the final release of Dark Souls. It worked as such. If the player hit Nito enough times, he would stagger as the skeletons on his stomach collapsed to the floor, only to resurrect and join the fight alongside him, making it much more of a challenge and putting heavier emphasis on the need for a divine weapon. On the first stagger, 2 sword-wielding skeletons would join. On the second stagger, another sword-wielding skeleton would appear alongside a bow-wielding skeleton. On the third and final stagger of the fight, a second bow-wielding skeleton appears, accompanied by a skeleton using a scimitar, or scimitar, or scimitar, however it's said. Anyway, this cut content is very likely to be why Nito has a modelled body underneath the mass of bones on his stomach area, and why all of those skeletons are animated. This is also why the Nito we know today is incredibly easy, as he was functionally a gimmick boss. Actually, I think it's also worth mentioning that Nito is speculated to be the first, or at least one of the first, bosses ever developed in Dark Souls' lifetime, which is kind of sad when you realize that despite this stature that he has, I suppose, he was kind of just chucked to the bottom of the catacombs to die a miserable death. The test character for Dark Souls is very bizarre. This character is wearing the Helm of Favor, Armor of Glorious, Xanthus gloves, and leggings of Favor. In their main hand, they use the Stone Greatsword as their primary and the Dragon Greatsword as their secondary. In their offhand, they use the Boulder Shield for primary and Demon's Great Hammer for secondary. Within their consumables lies 10 Estus flasks, an orange, white, and red sign soapstone, 1 cracked eye orb, and 50 divine blessings. For inventory, all they possess are 99 titanite shards. They have 50 standard arrows and 50 standard bolts for ammo, despite having neither a bow or crossbow. For their rings, they're using Havel's Ring and the Covenant of Artorias. This character has no name, they are in no covenant, and their soul level is 0 with 50,000 souls, and 50 in all of their stats, with 50 humanity actively consumed. Although this character has no staff, nor talisman, they seem to have attuned Chameleon, Lightning Sphere, Iron Flesh, Magic Weapon, Seek Guidance, and Force. However, none of these spells, nor miracles, can be found within their inventory. And when you rest at a bonfire, you aren't given the option to attune your magic, implying that this character actually hasn't gotten very far in the game at all.
Don't you dare let yourself go hollow, lest my time spent on you be wasted.